Good morning, everyone. We're going to get started just because we don't want to run too late. Fortunately, I have to do the lovely duty of the health and safety, so please listen up. There are no fire drills scheduled, so if the fire alarm goes off, assume it's not a drill and leave the building by the nearest safe route. So the fire exits are here to my right and out in the little mini corridor outside these doors on the left. That is an accessible fire exit. Once you've left the building, please go to the assembly point, which is outside to the left near Central Hall, and do not re-enter the building until you're told it's safe to do so. If you need first aid, please let myself or Olivia know. We will call the first aiders. If you have any injuries, accidents or near misses, let us know. Toilets are in the foyer opposite the auditorium, I can't speak. We also have a few house rules just to make the day enjoyable and accessible for everyone. When you're asking a question, please keep it short so that everyone has a chance to ask a question. Make sure it's actually a question and not an observation. Make sure you use a mic to ask your questions. We'll be going round in the Q&A panels with a handheld mic for you to use, just to ensure that everyone can hear you. We're going to be recording throughout the day. It's just an audio recording, but if you prefer not to be recorded, let us know and we'll make sure it doesn't record you. There may also be some photos taken throughout the day. If you don't want to be in any of those, again, let us know. Finally, please respect people's pronouns, people's opinions and people's lived experience so that it's a safe space for everyone. Feel free to tweet about the day using the hashtag UGHistConf, which is on the board there. Let's get started. It took me a very long time to understand that the principles and values I held so dear in my activism could be part of my study of history too. I used words like intersectionality when speaking to other activists, but I had never seen them used in the classroom. It wasn't until my second year, when I was set an article by Kimberly Crenshaw, that I realised I could bring those same values, those same principles, into my classes. This year, for the first time, I had a tutor talk about toxic masculinity and its impact. Finally, I'm beginning to see my values reflected in the history I'm learning. I've always been the student asking the awkward questions in class about what the women were doing, whether a historical figure might not be straight, about how an event affected the marginalised peoples in a community. So much of studying these histories is studying the silences, the gaps where marginalised people have been left out of history. And that makes it hard to teach, but even harder to find on your own. I think I needed to see people like me, to feel like I could relate. I needed to see people who struggle, whose experiences resonated with me. I needed to understand the barriers I was seeing in my daily life, the ones I was subject to, and the ones I saw others face. For me, I began to understand those barriers, those experiences, when I studied the histories of marginalised peoples. In particular, the histories of women and of lesbianism, of the disenfranchised and the silenced. That was the moment when I began to understand my own experiences and sought to understand those of others. And when I finally saw that history could be representative, could speak to the reality I had witnessed or experienced. For me, that is what history should be, and that's what we're trying to encourage today. Undergraduates should be encouraged to take ownership of the discipline, to push for the things we want to study and write about. History is not something that is done to you, it is something you do. As history students, we have the ability to participate in that work of writing, of making history, and we can do so by telling the stories we care about. I think all of our panellists today are part of that process, are doing that work, of putting the history they want to learn out into the world, shaping our understanding and our knowledge. I'm incredibly proud of the panels we've put together today. They're varied, they're fresh, they're rebellious. They represent how inclusive and exciting history can be if we step outside of the narrow confines of expectations and traditions. I think it's also important that we consider the timing of this conference. This week, many of our tutors and professional staff have been on strike, just like they will be in weeks to come. They're fighting for their own rights, but also for ours. They're trying to ensure that there is space in academia for creativity, not just for meeting targets. They're trying to ensure that academia is fair for women and BME staff, that we have space and time and the ability to do the research that matters to us and be paid fairly for it. I'm glad to see tutors from my department here today, and I hope that we can all reflect on the fact that the histories discussed today, the histories of marginalised and silenced peoples, are always the first to suffer when there are not enough staff, not enough hours, not enough funding. Striking staff and those of us pushing for a more inclusive and intersectional curriculum need to work together and support one another. Hopefully, you will leave here today inspired to take a new path, to look to the margins of the historical tradition and dive in headfirst. Or, perhaps for you, today will give you renewed energy and motivation to keep pushing for the history you want to learn, to teach, even to write. Either way, I hope you walk away from this conference feeling engaged, feeling energised, and above all, feeling hopeful.
Intersectionality is just a metaphor for understanding the ways that multiple forms of inequality or disadvantage sometimes compound themselves, and they create obstacles that often are not understood within conventional ways of thinking about anti-racism or feminism or whatever social justice advocacy structures we have. Intersectionality isn't so much a grand theory, it's a prism for understanding certain kinds of problems. African-American girls are 6 times more likely to be suspended than white girls. That's probably a race and a gender problem. It's not just a race problem, it's not just a gender problem. So I encourage people to think about how the convergence of race stereotypes or gender stereotypes might actually play out in the classroom, between teachers or students, between students and other students, between students and administrators, and commit themselves to understanding that as a way of intervening and providing equal educational opportunity for all students regardless of their identity. Identity isn't simply a self-contained unit, it is a relationship between people in history, people in communities, people in institutions. So schools do a good job when they understand that, and when they commit themselves to curricular development, to opportunities in the school, for all students to understand the histories that have brought us to this particular moment. You can't change outcomes without understanding how they come about. So independent schools can take the lead on that to be responsive to their student population, to the communities out of which the students come.
So you just listened to Professor Kimberly Crenshaw, an American lawyer and philosopher who developed the theory of intersectionality. I've shown this video because not only is it important to credit the origins of theories, but because in recent times, many people mistakenly interpret intersectionality to just mean multiple identities. Intersectionality is not about being diverse, especially because a person cannot be diverse. It is an analytical framework that allows us to examine the multiple forms of inequality that emerge as a result of having various identities. These forms of inequality can occur within communities, as well as be imposed on by institutions of power. For example, as recently revealed by Veronica Mackenzie's Under Your Nose documentary, one lesbian interviewee remarked that black men told her she would one day have to decide whether she was black or lesbian. That is why we are inspired by women such as Audre Lorde, Pat Parker, Bell Hooks. It is Bell Hooks' analysis of black women existing on the margins, especially within her book, From Margin to Centre, that we should all aspire to. That is why in this conference, we have encouraged participants not only to prioritise the histories of women and those who identify as BME, LGBT+, and disabled, but to engage with how the intersections between these groups mean that some people are left out of history. When we focus on disability, we tend to focus on disabled men. When we focus on black and Asian women, we tend to focus on light-skinned cis women. The theory of intersectionality not only exists to explain how societies further hinders individuals from the already deprived groups, it also explains how the historical discipline has further disadvantaged these people by failing to credit them in the histories of marginalised communities. As we observe these various and wonderful posters and papers today, I want you to reflect on these histories and ask yourself, as Kimberly Crenshaw does, I see the sexism in this, but do I see the racism? I see the homophobia in this, but do I see the ableism or the classism? Thank you.